Good morning, everyone. Good morning. If I can have your attention, please. Welcome to IRF Summit Asia. We're so honored that you're all here with us. We're going to begin our morning with an invocation from Pastor Seito from the Japanese Christian Association. Pastor, please.
The first, I am sorry, and my praying is only Japanese, okay? それではお祈りします。私たちの救い主、イエス・キリストの父なる神様、あなたがこの IRF サミットを行わせてくださることを信じ、このサミットが目指そうとしている信教の自由が指し示すところの信じる自由、また信じない自由がこのサミットを通して保障され、また私たちが大切にする機会として、このサミットをあなたが祝福してくださいますようにお願いいたします。すべて行われるこのプログラムにあなたの助けがあることを心から願い、私たちの救い主イエス・キリストの名前によってあなたの御前にこの祈りを捧げいたします。アーメン。
If you join me in welcoming our first panel chairman, Mr. David Curry, the president of Global Christian Relief.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, welcome. I'm so pleased to be here myself. And today we're going to open this day together and this time together by asking, what is this moment? What is IRF, the International Religious Freedom? Why are we here in Japan and in Asia? And my encouragement to you as we start this conversation, and that's what it's going to be a conversation, is that we all commit to trying to understand each other. That we slow down, both in our speech, so that we literally understand each other, but also to set aside our assumptions and really try to learn from each other. So I certainly am going to try to do that, and I welcome you to do the same. At this time, we're going to have a conversation with Katrina Lantos-Sweat and Sam Brownback, who are the co-chairs of the International Religious Freedom Gathering we're at here today. Would you please welcome Sam and Katrina? It's a pleasure to be with you here, and as we get started, I want to ask you a number of questions. Some of them will be policy, some of them might even be about your individual perspective, but I want to start with reading Article 18 of this Declaration of Human Rights, because I think it's important we start with not what is the law or the cultural imprint of our particular country, but what do we agree on, at least in theory, as an international standard. And here's what Article 18 says. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, of conscience, and religion. This right includes the freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. That's a big statement, and in many ways it's aspirational. Ambassador Brownback, I'll start with you. As you see the international law, and we start here focusing on Asia, how do you see our aspiration to live up to Article 18, to the international standard of religious freedom? How do you see that as a challenge in today's era?
Well, thanks, David. And I want to start off, too, by thanking everybody for being here. My guess is you can all look around, and you've never been in a meeting like this before, with as many diverse, different perspective people than you've ever been with before, and you may be a little uncomfortable because of that. I mentioned last night the International Religious Freedom Movement is a salad that's never been put together before. So it's it seems odd, and you're looking over and saying, what's the crouton doing there? Or what's that kale? I don't agree with those guys. This meeting is not about religion. It's about a common human right. It's the human right David just spoke about. Article 18 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights from 1948. I believe the most abused and neglected of the human rights globally. I also believe this is the most important human rights movement on the planet going today. This movement on religious freedom. And the reason I say that, this is the human right that's closest to the soul. It's the closest to the interior of what each of us is about. If we're going to live an honest life, this is one you have to be able to live openly and publicly. It's also a human right that the authoritarian regimes despise. They hate this right because it's generally people of faith that will stand up for their faith, stand up for what they believe in. It's also the human right that we have to get right if we're going to keep from having the clash of civilizations. Because civilization is built on a religion. And these civilizations are starting to come up against each other. There's more diverse Tokyo now than it's ever been before. And it's going to get more diverse. And unless we can allow space for each other to be the true, honest person they are, we're going to have a lot of clashes as a world. So that's why I call this the most important human rights movement in the world. The other piece of it, if we get this one kind of right, this is a cornerstone human right. You can build your freedom of assembly and freedom of speech and other items off of this human right, if you get this one right. You also can plug into an army. 80% of the world claims a faith of some type. And if you say, I'm standing up for your right to practice your faith anywhere in the world, freely, without persecution, as long as you're peaceful, you've got an army behind you of people that say, well, I'm with you on that. So this isn't about religion. It's about a human right that we're all entitled to. And David, I think that's what's important about what's coming together and what's starting here. This is a conversation. David hit it very well at the outset. We're just starting a conversation. I mentioned last night, I thought this was kind of a first date. Just kind of getting to know each other. Just getting acquainted. And I hope it's a long effort that we can do together to expand human rights around the world, to stand up to authoritarianisms, and to allow for a diverse world to be able to integrate and be around each other.
I love that. Thank you so much, Sam. Katrina, you know all the laws as well, but it's also personal for you, isn't it? And how it's affected your family and the way in which, with such grace, you've dealt with human rights and human rights violations. Maybe you could share a little bit about your perspective on how it affects you and everyone else.
Absolutely. Well, I want to sort of pivot off of what Ambassador Brownback said, because all of us in this room, every human being, we're very, very distinct among all of creation, because we are really the only creatures that walk or crawl this earth that are hardwired to ask the deepest, most consequential questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What is the purpose of my life? And those are exactly the kinds of questions that human beings in every culture and really in every period of history have been prompted to ask. And we're really the only ones we know of on this planet that have that hardwiring, if you will. And because of that, that I think helps to explain why defending freedom of conscience and belief and religion is so fundamental. Because not only should everybody have the right to ask those questions, but they must have the right to live their lives in accordance with the answers they get. And as the ambassador pointed out, there's a huge diversity of faith communities and belief communities represented just in this one room. We are all going to get very different answers, but it's so key to our dignity and our integrity as human beings that we be able to live out those answers. And that's what this international architecture around protecting freedom of religion, conscience, and belief is all about. I'm so grateful you read that definition because it really encompasses a lot. I mean, obviously you didn't memorize it having heard it perhaps for the first time, but it's the right, to participate in a religion or to change your religion, to do it privately but also publicly, alone and in community. And so it's really quite encompassing. And we are so excited to be here in Japan because, of course, Japan, as really the leading democracy in Asia, can play such a critical role in embedding awareness and advancing the protection of this right in ways that haven't happened yet. And I just want to mention one more thing quickly. So, both Ambassador Brownback and I have talked about how essential it is to our dignity and to the lives we want to live to defend this right. But it also turns out to be really smart public policy. There is a voluminous amount of research that shows that countries that do a good and a robust job protecting freedom of religion, conscience, and belief do tend to get the other stuff right as well. They tend to be more democratic, more pluralistic, less likely to be incubators of violence, of extremism, of social tension. And something that's very important to me, they also tend to be societies in which women have a higher socioeconomic status. So it's nice to know that it's not only the moral and the right and the idealistic thing to do to defend this right, it makes really good public policy sense.
I love that. Now, it is my job to ask the hard questions for you. So let me put out this one. And when we talk about understanding, one of the key things needs to be said is that we come from different political backgrounds too, not just religious. But you've been a senator and a governor, and you've obviously been an ambassador of one party, and your history and success you've had in another party. So we're dealing, folks, with Republicans and Democrats here. So and there's no more contentious thing in the world than political differences. But you agree on this, and you do it with grace and understanding. Let's talk about that the personal understanding that you guys come to this debate with on that level. It's like, how do we deal with the political differences we may see around this issue? Sam?
Well, you got to work at it, and we work at it. And what's obvious, the elephant in the room, is that the U.S. political system is having some turmoil right now.
Just a little bit. Just a little tiny bit.
Where Joe Biden, who I served with my entire time in the Senate, is not going to be the nominee for the Democrats now. We're not certain who will be. My party just put forward a nominee and a vice president. But what we can tell you is that this issue will continue to be a high priority in the United States, international religious freedom, from either party, Republican or Democrat party. And we work at that. Katrina and I disagree on a number of political issues, and I have great admiration for her husband, who was a Democrat congressman, her father, who I served with, was a Democrat congressman, the only Jewish Holocaust survivor ever to serve in the Congress, was a heavyweight human rights person. And that's the point I want to double back to it again. He was keen on human rights. We didn't agree religiously, we didn't agree politically, but we agreed he has a right to practice his faith as he sees fit, and I have a right to practice mine. And that can allow then that pluralistic society to function and to operate. And that's why this will be and will continue to be a strong bipartisan issue regardless of who's elected in the White House.
Yeah, I think it really is one of those rare, very rare issues in our very occasionally toxic and truly divided political environment that we're wrestling with right now in the United States, this is one of the few issues around which you can bring progressive Democrats and very conservative Republicans together. And one of the very exciting things to me about the international religious freedom movement is seeing groups stand up to defend the rights of those other than them. You know, I'm privileged because this is an initiative that was started by Ambassador Brownback, but I'm privileged to be the co-chair alongside him of our annual sort of international Religious Freedom Summit that takes place in Washington, D.C. And we would be thrilled for all of you to join us in 2025. It'll be the 5th year. But again and again, we see, you know, Muslims standing up to defend the rights of persecuted Christians in majority Muslim countries. We see, and vice versa. And honestly, you can think of almost any faith community in the world, and we all get it. We are all on board with the idea that we want to live in a world where each of us has the right in law, but also in culture. Because, you know, the law is one thing and politics is one thing, but a phrase we use sometimes in the United States is that politics and the law are downstream of culture. First comes the culture. And, you know, I will say that there are a lot of things we've done not so well in the United States. I'm very proud of my country, but I try to look at it with honest and occasionally critical eyes. But one thing we have done well is that from the very beginning, we had sort of embedded in our culture this idea that there would be a separation of church and state and also free exercise of religion. And we really think that there are many, many countries in the world where there may be decent protections in law, but it hasn't yet been embraced in the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I know and I think I speak for you, we honor the fact that Japan has opened up their arms to welcome this discussion. It's an amazing precedent that they're setting to say we're going to allow this to happen. We're going to talk about it. We're going to struggle through it. Asia is having a moment. I don't know that it's ever been as important as it is right now. Let's talk about for a moment what this moment is for Asia, the opportunity that stands before it on behalf of religious freedom and human rights.
It's phenomenal. It's huge. Asia is absolutely critical on this. It is critical that the large key Asian democracies like Japan and South Korea get strongly engaged in this religious freedom movement and in human rights pushing in general and standing up to authoritarians, standing up to them. We've got to push back because the technology now exists to virtually watch every one of us every second of every day. And you can pull one piece of it out of your pocket right now, your cell phone. And you can walk outside and the cameras that are there everywhere. And some societies have weaponized now those technologies to say, you know, if you just kind of go along with the flow and what the government wants, you're going to be fine. But if you want to be a practicing Muslim, you want to be a practicing Christian, practicing Buddhist, you're going to have problems with us. You're going to end up in jail or dead. And in some cases, as brutal as it might sound, body parts harvested. You're going to hear eyewitnesses of those things today. And it's generally religious people that this happens to. We've got to stand up to that, David, if we're going to have anything of a world like what we want. And you may not agree with a lot of the other faith communities. You may think they're just really strange, or they're off, or they're mean, or they're hateful, or whatever you may call it. That's not what we're talking. We're talking about a human right here that they have to follow their own soul peacefully. So this is a key Asian moment. The Chinese Communist Party right now is conducting 3 genocides. Right now. The Tibetan Buddhist, that they've marginalized and persecuted for decades now. The Uyghur population, it's dominantly a Muslim population, and you'll hear from Uyghur Muslims here, and the Falun Gong that has just been brutalized by this regime. You may not agree with the religion of any of them. You've got to agree, though, that they have a right to practice their faith and to be the person they want to be. And if we don't stand up for them, next they're coming for us. It never stops with an authoritarian because their objective is power. And they now have technologies in place to be that they've only dreamed of having in the past to control and manipulate people. Now is the Asian moment to stand up for that, and we've got to have these big Asian democracies, strong Asian democracies like Japan and South Korea and others engaged with this.
Katrina, how do you see what's happening in Asia and the opportunity that they have before them?
Well, definitely enormous opportunity and a lot of peril. The ambassador talked about the 3 communities being really egregiously targeted in China, and we could throw in the house church movement as well and others. If we look elsewhere, North Korea, any manifestations of faith are brutally, brutally crushed. If we look at the plight of the Rohingya Muslims in Burma, we see another community suffering just terrible, terrible persecution. We see it in Vietnam. We see it really across Asia. And so the peril is very, very real. But, I'm not saying anything you haven't all heard before. This is sort of a moment where we also see Asia economically and politically and culturally emerging as a force on the world stage on a much vaster and more impressive and more influential basis than ever before in history. And so, that opportunity and that peril are 2 sides of the coin. But I really do believe that this does come down to a bright line differentiation between societies that are ready to stand up and defend freedom, a whole range of freedoms, and those that are authoritarian and repressive in nature. And, it actually makes sense that dictatorial, totalitarian, and authoritarian regimes would be so fearful of people of faith, because the thing they need above all is control of their populations. And again, when people have sort of acquired convictions of their own that are deep in the fiber of their being, they are much harder to control. They have a kind of an integrity and often a courage that these regimes are not used to dealing with. And so they go really out of their way to crush these communities. And we very much hope, I want to echo what's been said, that it's really exciting, and we're grateful to Japan for welcoming us here. And we hope that this is going to be the start of a growing movement in Japan and in the region. But it's necessary. This isn't just aspirational that we hope. It's needed. Because as I say, the threats and dangers in this region of the world, they're clear and present.
Okay, now you're really going to be on the hot seat, because we're going to open up for you to ask questions. So if you have a question for our co-chairs, would you please raise your hand? And it could be on any subject related to international religious freedom. The one thing I would ask is that it is a question. If it becomes a statement or a monologue, I might cut you off, okay? But we have a microphone, a roving microphone. Where is that at? Right down here, we have a question. Yes, sir. Introduce yourself and ask your question.
Thank you very much for the great panel discussion. My name is Tatsunaka. I'm a Japanese lawyer. I truly admire your commitment to the human rights issues. And also I understand fully about the importance of Asia. But this is Tokyo. We have many audience from Japanese nationals. So might we have some comment on Japan issues or Japan? Why this is in Japan, not in Korea, not in China, not in Taiwan? Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Why is it in Japan?
Well, I'd say first and foremost because Japan is the largest democracy in Asia, and Japan increasingly will have that mantle around its shoulders. You know, wasn't that long ago, a gentleman by the name of Fukuyama wrote a very influential book called The End of History, in which he very optimistically suggested that, you know, liberal democracy had been demonstrated to be the best form of government. The argument was over. Well, history came roaring back in a big way. And we now find ourselves again, you know, I don't know if I want to go so far as to say in a third Cold War, but we are finding ourselves in a world where sort of the forces of democracy and human rights and freedom are increasingly, at least in an adversarial position, vis-a-vis a world led to some degree by China. And China's the lead partner, Russia, Iran, some of these other problematic countries are the more junior partners. And so that's, I think, the first answer to that question. The other thing that I'd say, and I know I started out by saying, you know, as an American, I'm very proud of my country, but I try to also look at it with realistic eyes. And certainly in the United States, we do not have anywhere near an unblemished record when it comes to religious freedom, either historically or now. And a very key point, and this I think may have some resonance in Japan, because Japan tends to be a largely homogeneous society. And freedom of religion, just like freedom of speech, doesn't mean much if it doesn't extend to protecting unpopular speech or minority or less popular faith communities. And that's something I think we need to keep in mind whenever we're talking about defending a very fundamental right. That, you know, it's easy to defend that which is popular. It's easy to give a speech where everybody's going to stand up and cheer for you. It's not so easy to stand up and give a speech where people will not want to hear what you have to say. But that's when you know a society really does protect freedom of speech. And I think the same can be said about freedom of religion, conscience, and belief. We have to be willing to defend, you know, the unpopular community, the one that people are not, you know, as familiar with, or maybe it's been caricatured or misrepresented. So that's something we have to work on in my country. And, you know, democracies need to strengthen themselves in that way so that they can really advance this cause effectively.
Sam?
You know, I just would say the Human Rights Project around the world has been in decline the last 15 years. We've lost ground on human rights the last 15 years by most measures. I'm horrified at that. I don't like making that statement, but we have. And we've let authoritarian regimes or our own biases kind of shove this one down, shove human rights down, even though we would all stand up right now and say, I'm for human rights. Every one of us would. It's in decline. Why? We haven't fought effectively for it. I think we've tried to define it too broadly, myself. I think we ought to get back to that original UN Charter of Human Rights, say this is what human rights are and this is what we're going to fight for, and really push it. I also think this is a central one. If you can get this one started, move in the right direction, we can help move the others along. And Asia is central to this. The International Religious Freedom of Belief Alliance, and you're going to hear from Ambassador Robert Riak of the Czech Republic today, has 40 nations in it. They're mostly European and North American. Japan is a friend, is an observer with it. South Korea the same. We need them to be actively engaged and pushing this. We need them staunchly in these things. If we're going to stand up to the authoritarian aggression that we are seeing that's been taking ground around the world. We need a strong Japan and South Korea in this movement. We've got to have it. And there are going to be domestic issues that you're going to have turmoil about. We've got it about that. That's why we bifurcate the issue into international and domestic. And you separate. International, we stand staunchly behind the UN Charter. Here domestically, you have a bunch of different things that are going to come up there, but we've got to have these major Asian democracies engaged in this, or we won't be effective.
And I would just say, Japan is the indispensable nation. It's not, this movement will not take root in a meaningful way in Asia without Japanese leadership. I just don't see it happening. So in that sense, it's almost like a challenge to our host country here that they are indispensable to this cause.
Yes, we have another question. If you just pass the microphone down here.
Thank you very much.
Sir, introduce yourself and
Yes,
your
yes.
question.
Is that okay? First of all, my name is Falah. I am representing the government of Kurdistan region, which is belong to NGOs department. I'm head of NGOs. We have His Excellency Minister of Religion Affairs here from Kurdistan region. We came all the way down to learn and to see what's exactly going up here. As the gentleman already mentioned about Japan and location, this is one of the. I don't have a question. I will have a suggestion if it's okay. David, he mentioned about the political issues and politicals, and as you both of the ambassador and Katrina, there are different ideas in political wise. In Middle East, as you know, the politics made loads of problem and loads of violence. It would be a great idea while you bring the summit to Asia and to bring to Middle East, because Middle East in need really this kind of idea directly from people. So really appreciate if we get that
Thank
summit.
Thank you so much. I mean, that is sort of a question. I mean, how do we look at these various regions around the world? The Middle East is one area that when we're together, we obviously, there's a lot of issues there. I'll ask Ambassador, would you please begin with that?
We need to do it. Right now, we're building a team. And you build your team amongst your allies, people you think would be willing to join your team. And we need to go on the field in the Middle East. Most of the issues in the Middle East involve a division of religion of some type or another, or ethnicity. But it's also, if you're going to solve a problem, you're going to solve it with the religions. Like the Abrahamic Accords, where you got an agreement between the Israelis and 5 Muslim countries, it was centered around the figure of Abraham, who is the quintessential religious figure. You've got to engage the religions, and to date, most of foreign policy is done on the reason side of things, and you don't engage religions. I think to really move forward on peace in the world, you've got to engage the religions. Those are the ones closest to the heart, to the soul. So I think the future of diplomacy actually runs through faith communities and effective diplomacy. We can talk all day long. Diplomats we can talk all you want. But if you're going to get something done, you got to get through the heart.
Oh, I agree. I mean, the Middle East is another very, very critical region. And, I don't want to today put myself in a position of sort of trying to make what might be unwelcome suggestions to other countries. But I will say this, that I do think part of the secret sauce to what has helped the United States quite successfully in our history to navigate that terrain where you bring people of faith into the public square and all that they have to strengthen a society is brought in, and yet it's pluralistic and there isn't favoritism among faiths. And I think a lot of that does have to do with this two-sided coin. On the one hand, a degree of separation of church and state, and that language per se is not in our Constitution, but as a general idea, it's something that I think most people in the United States sort of can identify with. But that stands alongside robust protection for the free exercise of religion. And, I think in some places, we see in the Middle East that there is no separation of mosque and state. And we even see in Israel sometimes these very religious parties have problematic influence over coalition governments. And so I do think, for a broad, big picture framing, it is very helpful when societies say, we are going to defend everybody's rights, but we will not have favored or chosen or preferred faith communities that are sort of promoted and given privileges that others are not.
Excellent. Thank you so much. No, we have a question here, gentleman with the red there. Introduce yourself, sir, please, and a question.
My name is Humayun Mughal. I am a journalist in Japan more than 40 years, originally from Pakistan. One thing I want to ask you that the democracy, what I heard about the democracy is like a definition is like a God and I, me and nation. First we make the house of God and then we build the nation. This is a real democracy, but somehow that democracy is getting destroyed because there's only power and I, me and nation. So power is destroying the problem. What is the process? How you can unite the God hearts to the political leaders so they can stop genocide the people in the Middle East, like Israel wars or Palestinian people are killing there? I think they don't God's mind. So I need that how to connect their God mind to the political leader so they can stop this genocide the person. My question, please.
There is a challenge here, which is we understand that people, there's a spiritual element to this faith, regardless of what it is. It's about the heart, it's about the mind, it's about the soul. And leaders, we must appeal to the soul and the heart of our leaders, but they have these political equations as well. Sam, how do we deal with that dichotomy within every human, and how do we bring that pressure to bear on our leaders?
Yeah, I think number one is you got to recognize it. And number two, what's the role of government in all of this? And we would say the role of government is to protect your right to practice your faith as you see fit, not to pick a side, not to pick a winner or a loser, not to favor one or the other, but to say you have the right to practice your faith as long as you're peaceful. If you're not going to be peaceful, if you're going to blow up buildings and everything, you're going to jail. But the role of government in this isn't to pick that side, it's to protect that right. I think that's the key thing that political leaders have to get clearly in mind.
And also just to add another thought, I think it's very unhealthy for religions when they are co-opted by governments, when faith communities become a tool and sometimes even a weapon of those who wield political power. One example that comes to mind very much from current events unfolding around the world has been the way, for example, in Russia, we've seen Vladimir Putin kind of try to co-opt the Russian Orthodox Church to sort of bless his war efforts in Ukraine. It's a big topic, not one I want to get into, but I think that that's very damaging for religions and for faith communities if they become wielded as kind of another tool of political power. I don't know if that's a little bit what you were getting at, sir, but I do think that the healthiest societies are those where people of all beliefs and none are protected, are treated with respect, have an equal place at the table. And as Ambassador Brownback said, everybody needs to be welcome at the table, but everybody has to have some table manners. Everybody has to live, respectfully by the rules of the society. But also where the government doesn't weaponize a particular faith, either co-opting it to advance their goals or weaponizing itself against a particular faith, so that relationship between those who wield political power and those who who operate in that realm of faith, that it has to be respectful but not intertwined, in my opinion.
And we wrestle with this a lot in the United States, as I'm sure you've observed, that we are far from perfect on this. I want to also compliment Katrina. She's been on the plane or in an airport about 40 hours and got in at 4 a.m. this morning to make it here because of so many delayed flights. And she's still upright.
That's wonderful. I would love to yes, thank you so much. We have more questions. Unfortunately, I'm getting the time. We have other panels coming. I'm so sorry. That will have to be the final word. Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for answering the questions directly, for being understanding of each other, your political differences, faith differences. We need to model for each other today how we treat each other and then take it out. And these discussions are going to be rich and they're going to be healthy. Thank you so much for organizing this event. We so appreciate it. Will you please
Thank
thank
you,
our
Dave.
co-chair?